So good morning, June 2nd. Today is a time where I think a lot of us probably woke up asking ourselves, in response to unfolding situations in our country and our world, asking ourselves, what can we do? What can we do? How do we move forward with all this? How do we move forward with wisdom, with power, with love, and incorporating all of those, not just one of them. And the Psalm this morning in our devotional, Psalm 11, I think has some an interesting word for us. And I think God is speaking through his word this morning. So this is Psalm 11, verses 1 through 5. In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to me, flee like a bird to the mountains? For look, the wicked bend the bow. They have fitted their arrow to the string to shoot in the dark at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his gaze examines humankind. The Lord tests the righteous and the wicked, and his soul hates the lover of violence. So in verse 3, there's this poignant verse that I think spoke to me this morning. I'm willing to bet it'll speak to you, where the psalmist writes, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? What can the righteous do? And we're in the midst of a continued season of watching some foundations of our world be destroyed. The foundations of our health with this pandemic, foundations of government and who is leading and how are they leading, and who has authority over which decisions to order shelter in place or deploy armed forces. It's just, we're in a very tumultuous season about concerning a variety of foundations, if you will, and I think that God's church is meant to echo the cries of the psalmist and saying, what can we do? What can the righteous do? And of course, we're the church that's defined by the grace of Jesus, and so we're not this sort of self-righteous community saying we are the righteous, what do we do? But in Jesus, as those who are defined by Jesus's righteousness, I think we can identify ourselves as the righteous in this case. How do we move forward? What do we do when the foundations that so many lean on in our world start to crumble? What do we do? And I don't have the answer for that this morning. So if you were hoping I could provide the answer, I'm not going to. I think it's a question we can sit with and wrestle with in this time and in the days to come. And of course, during this time, I think we can listen well to the voices of those who have been suffering under those foundations for many, many years, decades, centuries even. So I think this is a time for us, as we ask that question, we're called to listen to the people who have a position different from ours in order to offer unique perspective, and that we might listen to them. So right now I'm spending a lot of time listening to our Black brothers and sisters as to how I might move forward in solidarity with them. And I think that's something for us to consider. But then, so it continues right after verse 3, it says, what can the righteous do? And then in verse 4, there's this declaration of the psalmist: the Lord is in his holy temple, the Lord's throne is in heaven. And I think that's a good reminder that as we ask that question, what can the righteous do? As the foundations of our world crumble, what can we do? Right in the midst of that sort of existential angst and despair, the psalmist then it reminds himself of this claim, this foundation, if you will. The one foundation remains in the midst of other crumbling foundations, and that is this: that the Lord is in his temple, and the Lord's throne is in the heavens. And I think there's really kind of like two simple ideas with that. The Lord is in the temple. In other words, the Lord is with us. God is with us, and that was the temple was the place of God's manifestation, during the writing of the Psalms. And so God is with us. May we take comfort in that. What can we do as the foundations crumble? We don't know, but we do know God is with us. And then second, the Lord's throne is in heaven. So not only is God with us, but God's throne encompasses all of creation. This idea that God is not only with us, but God is sovereign. God's sovereignty is total. It's utter. It's complete. I once, got to hear Michael Frost get up and offer a word of encouragement to a group of people, and there were a lot of speakers at this conference, and many were just seemed to be so worried about making sure to get things right for the sake of bearing witness to God's kingdom, and brilliant things that they offered, and ideas, but then Michael Frost gets up there and he says, "Let me ask you a question. Like, is there a single pocket of creation where God's reign is not sovereign? Is there a single, corner of the universe where God is not present and God is not sovereign?" And and so everyone's kind of sitting with it and like, no, like, of course God is everywhere and God is sovereign. And that doesn't mean that there isn't brokenness and pain, but it does mean that God is present, that God is sovereign in the midst of all that brokenness and pain. And it does mean that God is on mission to redeem and restore all of that brokenness and pain. So as we sit this morning watching foundations crumble, and we ask ourselves, what can the righteous do? May we be reminded that, number one, God is with us. God continues to be with us. And second, that God is sovereign in the midst of all of it. And then there's a brilliant quote from Julia Ward Howe, who helped to establish the holiday that we celebrate today, Mother's Day. Today isn't Mother's Day, but today, in our day and age, we celebrate Mother's Day. And I was really interested to realize that, or to read this morning, that that Mother's Day was a holiday to honor mothers by working for an end to all war. That was this real powerful movement of celebration where we as God's people, I think, are called to an end of war, to celebrate the day when we will study war no more. And so there's this quote from Julia Ward Howe that I think is worth our time this morning. "Arise then, women of this day. Arise, all women who have hearts, whether our baptism be of water or of tears. Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands will not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. The sword of murder is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence indicate possession, as men often have forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war. Let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of counsel." To that I say amen. And as women led that charge, may men follow their lead, and may we continue to do so in a world that is ravaged by violence and war and the great lie from that goes all the way back to Cain and Abel, the great lie that violence is somehow the most powerful expression of power. But in fact, Jesus and Julia Ward Howe this morning remind us that no, in fact, peace and love, and as Jesus demonstrated, self-sacrifice, that is really the most powerful expression, the most effective, I should say, expression of power. So foundations are crumbling. May we be reminded that God is with us, God is sovereign, and of course, Jesus invites us to express that God's call to embody a power of nonviolence and self-sacrifice really is our path forward as we see our foundations crumble among us. Amen.